Okay, awesome. Rohan Patel, comic book movie.
Hello.
Hi, Isaac. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Well, I mean, episode four is a absolute banger. So I just want to get started. When you get a show like Loki, what's your sort of first steps in your process? Where you're like, are you breaking down the script? Are you in conversations with the director about what kind of shots they want, or what's your sort of, what's your go-to? I guess.
Yeah, the first, I kind of have just hey, what do we want this to look like? And just see what happens. I mean, it's not a very good question, but sometimes it can elicit very specific responses. So, but generally, yeah, the I'm very focused on lighting, and I find directors are often more particular about camera stuff. So I mean, the cinematographer's job isn't, well, the way I think of it is to execute the director's vision. Oftentimes directors want to co-create that vision with the cinematographer, and the cinematographer brings a lot to the table, but really it's our job to get inside the head of the directors, to understand how they feel about filmmaking, to understand how they think, you know. So my first mission was really to absorb the way Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead understood their craft and understood cinema as an art form, and given that understanding, how they chose to approach things. So I studied their work. Fortunately, they had a pretty big body of work. They've directed like 5 independent films and a bunch of TV. And I spoke with them, and what I discovered was they actually have a very different philosophy and approach than I had. So what I realized was that I had a learning opportunity. But I realized that I had a lot to learn because their approach was so different from me. Traditionally, I had been more of like studio mode, which is dolly, crane, steadicam, these more cinematic types of camera platforms, and more static shots, and focusing on like finding like a big, wide, super beautiful frame. Whereas they kind of they love movies that have been made that way, but they're like, you know what? And that's the way the first season was made as well. If they hadn't been the directors, that this season would have looked a lot more like the first season than it ended up, right?
Mhm.
But they're like, we're gonna throw all that stuff out, and we're going to basically pretend like this is a documentary. There's a camera person that's really a human that's there, that has the camera, and they're finding this stuff as it happens in the moment, like a war photographer. One of the major references was battlefield um, war photography, like actual movie camera war photography, not stills photography. And that's really where the conversation began. It was, this is through the lens of a war photographer, and then it was just building on top of that.
Awesome. And since you were talking about lighting, and then this is also a Marvel show, so it already has sort of this, I guess, Marvel aesthetic that we've seen in like 30 something films and projects. And then this is a project which I assume has a heavy dose of CGI and visual effects incorporated. So what's your process when you're lighting for scenes that involve a lot of CGI or missed minutes in the scene, or how's that all work out for you?
That's a good question. Sequences that have a lot of CGI, like the set pieces, are always prevised, so it's pretty clear what we're doing and what we need to get and why and what all the different elements will be. And then we have our VFX supervisor, Chris Townsend, who's brilliant, there with us, helping hold our hand through this process of getting all the materials. And he's always trying to make sure we're getting what he needs to build his world in post-production. But in general, the truth is that shooting VFX sequences is not nearly as complicated as it looks in the finished product. Because when you're seeing it, it's like, oh my God, this is insane. But really, it just comes down to the classic elements of filmmaking. What shot size is it? Is it a wide shot? Is it a full body shot? Is it a medium shot, or is it a close up? It's going to be one of those. You're just always in one of those. Is the camera moving? If so, is it pulling back with the character? Is it following the character? Is it panning between two characters? And it's just the same fundamentals you're always dealing with in a scene that doesn't have VFX photography. It's just that there's going to be this whole crazy world in the background, or whatever, or something zooming through the frame. And so it's really as simple as just shoot the shots that you want to get, light it the way that you want it to be lit, Obviously, depending on what environment VFX will be placing in the background, the lighting has to take cues from that. But really, the lighting in that environment gets constructed around the lighting that you do on set. So there's not even as much of a lighting component to these VFX sequences as you'd think, because you are actually deciding what the lighting in the VFX will be later on set, right? Um, and VFX supervisors love that. They want the DP to have really decisive, specific lighting so that when they're doing their VFX, it's clear what the light source needs to be. You know, they can actually get in trouble if you try to do just generic wishy-washy lighting, because then they're like, well, where's the light coming from in the background, you know? But yeah, it's pretty much as easy as plan the shots you want, light them the way that you want to light them, and then just don't do any big no-nos, like having a character's head go off of the blue screen or something.
Mhm.
Because there's like lights above the blue screen and people always want low angles. It's like there actually is quite, no matter how big your blue screen is, the rule is it's never big enough. You know, if you had a 360-degree blue screen, you would still somehow suddenly be seeing off of the top of it, even if it were 60 feet tall. It's like, it's insane. There is no way to get as much coverage as you need ever with blue screens. So that's one thing you're always battling, you know?
I gotcha. And I haven't even thought about that. But then, and then also the show uses a very unique color palette with the brown and green, which are sort of these predominant colors. So, I guess, I mean, how do you incorporate that into your sort of thought process? Is like, these are the colors I'm working with. This is what I need to do to make them look good as possible on screen, or what's that
Yeah.
sort of process like?
You know, colors and lighting have a close relationship, and Kasra Farahani, the production designer, and I worked together just to make sure that the colors were coming across the way that they were supposed to. I mean, first of all, the LUT is a big part of that. The LUT is like the color settings that you usually do in post-production in the color grade. You can actually do a lot of that stuff and load it into the camera so that when you're shooting, you're actually seeing how your color grade is going to look later. And so that LUT, for example, had to be adjusted quite a bit to make sure that the colors were coming across right. You know, like those iconic orange typewriters in the chrono monitor wing, or the yellow computers that they use. Like, we talked a lot about the rendition of those specific colors and others, and made sure that the LUT was allowing them to shine through appropriately. At the same time, lighting is a part of that as well. You know, the general rule is warm colors look good in warm lighting, and cool colors look good with cooler or whiter lighting. So you'll notice in the upper levels of the TVA, where everything is kind of brown and beige and orange and yellow, the lighting is quite warm. And then when we get to the engineering level, where OB works, for example, the colors of the set are more teals and mints and things of the blue-green shades. So we cooled down the lighting. The lighting is quite white. You know, if I had tried to light that engineering level with the warm light that you see on the upper levels, that blue would have looked gray and the green would have looked yellow, and so on. So it's a delicate balance. You can't just do whatever you want. You have to be very carefully considered in every decision.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. And you have there's this you use a, I think it's a small little oneer near the end of the episode when they're all seeing what happened to Victor Timely. Can you just sort of break down your process behind setting up that shot? And I guess, just if if it was even longer, if you had to do something else, or what kind of goes into behind making a oneer like that?
Sorry, which episode?
The
Season?
fourth one, there's like a small, it's just very quick where you're panning from, I don't know if you might just be panning from Tom Hiddleston all the way over to Obi or something like that, but I don't know if you know exactly what shot I'm talking about.
Yeah, you know, I think I do. I actually watched episode 4 last night. That sequence, I was actually thinking the same thing as you when I was watching it. I was like, wow, there's a lot of cool, like, it's not just that one, there's a couple shots that are kind of
Mhm.
like sequence. And that is just reflective of the approach that we took all season. It's just that in this case, those moments were allowed to play without cutting a little bit longer than usual. But actually, in every single scene, the first shot we shoot is a oneer. We shoot the entire scene in one shot with a handheld camera, just going around and picking up every piece. And it can feel really awkward. Like you can see it almost feels awkward in that sequence in a way that we love, where the camera is just kind of like bouncing as it walks like all the way across the room to the next character. But the idea there is to make it, we want you to feel the presence of the camera operator. We want you to feel that there's a human being holding that camera. Again, going back to the war photography thing, it's because it almost feels more real when you just accept the fact that there is a person holding the camera. It makes it kind of, it says this isn't an illusion. Like this is a thing that's really happening, and we were there documenting it with the camera. And also in general, whether the camera's held handheld or not, the longer you hold a shot without cutting, the more you're suggesting to the audience that this is really happening. This is really unfolding, because, you know, the artifice of cinema at a most fundamental level, it's the edit, it's the cut, right? It's like when you cut from one thing to another, you're telling the audience, this could have been 3 days later, like the crew took a break, everyone was drinking coffee, like this is a thing that's constructed from different pieces that are being like spliced together. That's what you're telling an audience very subconsciously every single time there's an edit, or so the argument goes. When you don't have those edits, when you keep the shot going, you're telling them this is real, these characters are real, this place is real, and you're really here with them.
Yeah, no, it really makes it feel a lot more dire. And then there are also a lot of sort of dark scenes in the episode. And I think, just speaking from experience, it's very hard to sort of take photographs or video in, you know, dark. So how do you light those kind of scenes, and how do you like that hallway sequence when Loki and Sylvie do their little ambush? How do you go about lighting that kind of sequence where it's like you can't really see nothing, but you can also see clear as day?
Right. It's interesting. I mean, look, the bottom line is that big studios like Marvel are always concerned about, is something going to be too dark or not? So when you shoot these scenes that are supposed to be dark, like it says it's dark in the script, you're kind of like, okay, well, how do we honor the mood of this scene that's been necessitated by, you know, the tone of the script and what happens in it, and the fact that everyone is going to be very concerned with, is it too dark? You know, can we see the performances, all that. So we figured out a workaround. We figured out something that would let us make scenes as dark as we wanted while feeling very, very safe and protected, and like we could always, you know, bring up whatever we needed to, which is, it's a technique in filmmaking called overexposure. That's where you give more light to the piece of film or the digital sensor than you want it to finally actually look like in the final image, you know? So if you want to shoot a dark scene, you actually shoot it really bright, and then you bring it down in post. So we didn't, you know, it's important to have the footage on set and in the edit room, which comes directly from the set, look right and look dark enough. So what we decided to do was overexpose the image, but kind of secretly, in a way where no one would know how much we were overexposing it. So we took that LUT that I was talking about and we made it really, really, really dark. So anytime things look really dark, it's actually way darker than they really looked on the exposure. It's just because the LUT was making it look dark. So when we shoot these dark sequences, we're lighting them exactly as dark as we want. Like what you see in the final edit is kind of the way that it was on set. But we get to feel like totally free to make it as dark as we want, because we know secretly it's not at all dark in the base exposure that we're recording into the camera. And that's also why you kind of see that it's really dark, but you can see everything because it's really bright. You're actually getting detail on everything. So even though you're bringing the image down so it's super dark, there's technically an exposure there and there's detail there that wouldn't be there if you'd actually shot the scene that dark with like the level of lighting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was that just set off so many light bulbs in my head. But thank you
Yeah.
so much for your time, Isaac. I really appreciate your time. This has been it's been really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rohan.